For the longest time, I never believed in hiring a personal trainer. And this is not because I thought they weren't good. I just genuinely believed that if you cared enough about something, you could figure it out yourself. And to be honest, that belief served me really well for years. But I started to think to myself, what changed? Recently, I joined a new gym, and as part of the bravado of going into a new environment, I like to get to talk to people, understand their stories. And I met this trainer, casual conversation. And throughout that conversation is the gym bro conversation. How much protein do you eat? What's your training regimen looking like? So at the back of my head, I was already like, yeah, I already know this. And I know you want me to buy your service, but thanks. Because I thought I knew everything I knew. But recently, I had figured out that my body at the gym had not really shown progress to the level that I know I'm capable of. And this got me thinking maybe I should prompt more about his journey because his body looked like it was at the apex of physical fitness. So paid a little bit more attention to his conversation, and he started telling me about progressive overload and nutrition and recovery. And the recovery part stuck with me because the word recovery was familiar, but the framework that he was relaying to me was not. And I got to think to myself, let me double click on this part. So essentially, we ended up having a conversation around recovery, and I'll dive more into what he said recovery was versus what I said to myself or what I knew recovery would be over the course of the years of my training regimen. But I remember him offering a trial week for training with him. And I said, okay, it's a week. Why not see what something different might offer for my body? So I picked up on the offer and we got to work. In the first training session, I almost cried at the gym, man. Because the way he was training my body was a completely different way to what I was used to. So this new stimulation and new training regimen shocked my body to the point where I felt like I had not been gymming ever in my life. Mind you, I've been working out for close to a decade. So it was so hard the first 2 days. Then I took a break in between, and then we did the second ladder of the week. And I realized that after that initial difficulty, my body quickly adapted to this regimen that he introduced to me. And I started to think to myself, God damn, that was way too quick. Like it's only been a week and my body's already adapting to his style of training. And that got me to really relay on how much sometimes in life have we have mental blockers on our capabilities in showing up in the things that we're so used to showing up because we've plateaued or we've become accustomed to the routine. I look at it from this perspective in the sense that being busy and being consistent does not equal to growth. Because I observed this with myself. I was going to the gym as consistently as I have over the past couple of years, but my body was not responding to my exercise routine. I tie this to thinking that my consistency and my quote unquote discipline was doing the job. But essentially, my body adapted. And just like everything else in life, once you adapt to a certain set of conditions, you have to prompt yourself to get outside of that comfort zone so that you elevate or grow to a different version or a different space of what you're normally used to. And a big part of this was a realization of tracking my weights. And in fitness, there's something called progressive overload. So if you do a certain weight last week or a certain set number of sets or certain reps, you increase it periodically depending on your strength and endurance and just muscle recovery in general. And beforehand, I thought I was progressive overloading, but I wasn't really measuring anything, you know? I say that because how many times would I go to the gym, especially the isolation machines, and I'd be in there, I put a certain weight, let's say 60 kgs or 30 pounds, whatever the measurements you use, and I'll be there doing like leg curls. And then next week, I'll come back to the same machine and be like, wait, did I do 30 or did I do 40? I'm tired. Let me do 25. So the difference between that and what I learned from this trainer during that week was tracking. And he introduced me to an app that essentially allowed me to track each and every set that I do at the gym so that when I return back to that exercise, I have a reference point of where I've been working, what I've been working with during my workouts. So I started to think to myself, how many areas of my life do I really think I'm improving just because I'm showing up? And I became uncomfortable, bruh, in a sense where I got out of the gym and I started to think about careers in the past where I consistently showed up at a job without even having the metrics to check if I'm getting better because I'm just getting paid to show up. I started to think about relationships, how sometimes I stayed in relationships that didn't really serve my needs, but just because it made me comfortable and I was used to this person, I stayed. I started to think about creativity and how some days I just created from the fact that I felt like this is a session that needed to happen. But was I really challenging my creativity? And essentially, I came to a question that was very uncomfortable. Where else do I mistake consistency for growth? And a lot of times we're sold on the hustle culture. We're sold on keep showing up. Everything is going to turn out if you consistently show up. But sometimes we have to challenge our internal frameworks from the perspective of other people. Because what I learned is we don't know everything and we always have room for growth, but room for growth equals room for learning. So if you have room for learning, it's paramount that you allow yourself to let others influence you. And then you pick and choose. Not every single thing that you learn is good for you because we all operate differently. We all have different OS systems. But it's so important to expose yourself to different frameworks when you feel like your own framework is not giving you the same result that it once did. Because sometimes it's not that we lack effort, it's just that we have reached the limit of our current perspective. And what if that's what a plateau actually is? Not a lack of effort, but a lack of perspective. And this allowed me to shift into something that I haven't done a good job in my current capacity, which is mentorship. And I find that sometimes our ego and pride, independence, whatever you want to allude to, they don't allow us to let someone else teach us. And that can be detrimental to growth because for learning to occur, there has to be an acceptance that I don't know and that I admit that this is something I'm not well versed in. So when you look at that, there's a challenge to your personal ego as an individual that a lot of us don't like facing in so many different areas of our lives. Sometimes it's a fear of also admitting that we've plateaued, but progress is not about perfection. It's about how much better did I get out of the situation that I put myself in. So some days it's good to look at growth as something that often begins when we're humble enough to admit that our current framework has taken us as far as it can. Because looking back, the trainer didn't give me information that I never had before. He gave me a perspective I had never considered. And sometimes that's the only thing standing between where we are and where we're capable of going. So my reflection for you this week is, where in your life have you become incredibly consistent, but quietly stopped growing? And what perspective have you been avoiding simply because you've convinced yourself you already know enough? This was your weekly reset. I hope we can all reflect, read, and rise. And I'll catch you on the next one.